For this interview, I had the chance to sit down with Matt, the CEO of Generic Lake Monster. As an indie dev, Matt wears many hats, from designer to programmer to director, as you will hear in this interview, as we discuss the development of Quarterstaff, a beautiful turn-based strategy game that was built with accessibility at its core. I did run into some sound issues on my end, so a few parts had to be cut, but Matt's answers come through clearly and I think really showcase the team's dedication to making the game the best it could be and really trying to make it right. One thing that really stood out to me while browsing the many positive reviews on the Steam page was the range of perspectives. Some players came to Quarterstaff specifically looking for a game with accessibility, while others were simply just looking for a great game, and all seemed very pleased with Quarterstaff. I think that kind of across-the-board positive reception isn't easy to achieve, and it speaks volumes to the care and intention behind the game's design. So yeah, I hope you enjoy the interview. Hello, this is Emily with Pixel Breakdown, and today I have Matt. Did you want to give a quick introduction?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Matt McLean. I am the CEO, designer, programmer at Generic Lake Monster, and I've been making games professionally for about 20 years and running my own indie studio for about 6 years. Wow, time flies.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome. I did want to know, Generic Lake Monster, that's a pretty creative name. How did the studio come to be, and what is the story behind that?
Of course. So after about a dozen years of making games for a studio, I guess I had no children that would starve to death if I made a risky life decision, like quitting my stable job and risking everything to make the games I wanted to make. And I also knew I probably needed to learn how to program to make my own games. And at about the same time, I was feeling like primed and ready to quit my job. I had a friend of a friend with a ton of professional programming experience, but not a lot of professional gaming experience. He was excited to share his favorite programming language to anyone willing to learn, and took him up on the offer, of course. Hey, knowledge. But we soon realized our sensibilities in games had a lot of overlap, and we found it easy to agree on just where to go with the question of like, hey, what would we actually make if we were to do this full time? So yeah, since it was kind of easy, we were on the same wavelength. We decided to embark on things and make the best game we could with our time and budget. We agonized over the name for months, to be honest, because like our inner critics were constantly shooting down every suggestion we came up with.
Right.
It's like there's a lot of like tough sounding names of we didn't want to have anything super cringy like Code Ninjas. We just every time we would come up with a suggestion, we'd be like, that sounds a little lame. Like, yeah. Well, we'll get it eventually. But then, as we were starting to make something, at some point you have to have a Steam page that has a company name on it. So anyway, in our various discussions, Laura, one of the artists on the team, she had picked up on the fact that like, hey, we all think cryptids are kind of cool. And one day she suggested, how about Generic Lake Monster? It's like cryptid theme. It's on the theme of cryptids without appropriating any specific lake monster, which is kind of cool. And it was like just one of those weird moments where we all like, the discussion just fell quiet. We're like, yeah, I guess we found the perfect name. Problem solved. So yeah, we agonized it forever, and then we heard it, and we're like, yep, that was the winner. So yeah, Generic.
It is a cool name. It really is. You always want something that would like look cool on a t-shirt or something, right? Like it's like you want something that you can stick to. Generic Lake Monster is good. Legally distinct Lake Monster might be another good one. But no, it's in the same sort of like, you could make that anything, whatever you want it to look like. It's whatever Lake wants. So wait, you actually you were in games before, right? And then you decided to shift over and you're like, I'm doing my own.
Yeah. My previous job was at Obsidian Entertainment for about 12 and a half years. And I was kind of started as a junior designer on Neverwinter Nights 2, and like a system designer on Alpha Protocol, level designer on Fallout New Vegas. I was the lead designer of South Park Stick of Truth, narrative director on Tyranny. I did a whole bunch of. I was very, very lucky to work on like level design, systems design, narrative design, all the different designs, and that was like a really gratifying education. And when you're at a studio and you're a professional designer, you can't just be like raise your hand and be like, "Hey, can I be a programmer on the next project?" Like they didn't really have time to train you how to program from the ground up. But I knew that's something that I wanted to do, and I wouldn't be able to just say like, "Hey guys, can I take like just a lateral move over to programming?" That wasn't really going to happen, but I knew I just kind of had to do it myself. And in many ways, I'm sort of lucky that the pandemic happened because I needed that stuck at home time to actually learn how to program.
Right.
I started this endeavor being really bad at programming. I tried to learn it in high school and college, had a terrible time both attempts, but yeah, I was in some ways lucky that I couldn't go anywhere. I just had to sit and stew with the challenge of programming, and yeah.
That's awesome. I think indie game development, it helps if you can be that person who wears all the hats. And that sounds like for sure.
There's almost no other way to do it.
Right,
Yeah.
right. You kind of have to. You're put in that position, and then it's like next thing you know, you actually enjoy doing all the things, right?
Yeah.
So how did you decide which game idea to pursue as a was
Oh,
there a couple or?
that's a good question. So for several months, we were just kind of like a really small team of three, and we took like I guess you call it like a game jam approach to making a thing that matched together familiar games that we knew just to get like into the rhythm of making games together. So we were kind of just doing things like, what does a clicker game look like? Can we do tower defense? What would it be like to do StarCraft? Not that we thought we could make StarCraft, but just trying to
Right.
like, a top-down clickable thing. Like we shared these languages of games, so we could just say like, hey, what would it look like to build a tower defense like interface? And we actually kind of knew we were building something sort of out of scope that we might not take to completion, but we were finding out sort of about the things that we agreed on that were fun. Like we kind of realized that accessibility was something like we kind of all shared. Me personally, I'm colorblind, and I've typed so much branching dialogue that I've got a lot of carpal tunnel. So I love me some gaming, but I can't hold the controller like I used to, or I can, but I just, after a few hours of gaming, I'm just like, yeah, I need to put this down.
Yeah.
Or better yet, if it doesn't require a controller and just mouse and keyboard, I can play at more my speed. So and my buddy James was kind of in the same boat where he was like, yeah, for me, it's also just sort of like time. I want games that like, if I have to hit pause, I kind of hate the game because I just want to be able to like, oh no, my cat's causing problems, and just put the game down without having to first.
Yeah.
And these are all accessibility issues that we knew that mattered to us. We also knew that we didn't want to make anything gratuitously violent. Like no one on the team was excited to be like, oh, let's have blood splatter dynamics and cool spray, and I'll make the graphics for it. Like we weren't exactly like excited to make a Mortal Kombat clone or anything like that.
Right.
And we also knew that we wanted to make games that we can dive into deeply, yet play in small bursts and walk away from at any moment. And so after months of tinkering with our original working project, I was kind of seeing what we were good at making and could make. And I suggested to the team, like, hey, here's I think something we could make with the tech we've developed so far. Because that was really Quarterstaff. When you make games for a living and each game takes multiple years of your life, you sort of end up with some pet ideas in the back burner. And that's kind of where Quarterstaff came from. It was like a fusion of something I'd want to make for a long time, but also more importantly, something that was within our power to make.
Right.
Like, yeah, this was a kind of like a small game idea that I thought might be fun. And I think it's within scope, so let's try it. Yeah.
It seems like a good one too, because you can, as you're gaining new abilities, like programmatically or whatever you're in, like it seems like a good one where you can add stuff as you're going. So yeah, it's very interesting. What game engine did you develop in, and is there a reason you went with that one? Had you tried developing in any other ones prior?
We didn't use an engine actually. We coded the game from the ground up.
Oh wow!
And for any aspiring indie developers out there, I should say this was not a savvy, cost-effective indie developer decision making move. It's very much an intentional journey of making things difficult for ourselves for the sake of learning, just to be honest. I spent years asking programmers like, so would this be possible? Is this design doable? And I guess I just kind of thought like, hey, before I die, I need to work on a game where like I know the sort of code challenges that my silly ideas are creating downstream. I wanted to be able to like, is this doable? Rather than asking someone, just like try it myself.
Yeah.
As for trying other engines, I've personally worked in Unreal, Unity, some proprietary tools like Gek for Fallout New Vegas, and there was this in-house engine at Obsidian for Dungeon Siege 3 and South Park Stick of Truth. And it was tempting to grab a software parcel that had a lot of the work done for us. And we actually briefly debated using Godot because the language that we did use is Elm, which is a functional programming language, and Godot uses functional programming. So Godot seemed like, hey, maybe this gives us the engine, but lets us work in our programming style. But I think at the time, at least, Godot was kind of new enough that we were like, well, it's not going to have so many things out of the box that it's going to save us that much time. And if we do a little bit more work on our own code base, at least we can like solve all our problems in-house. I remember like long ago working on Alpha Protocol, and we sometimes had technical issues that had to do really with Unreal. And our programmers would be like, well, we need to wait for Epic to get back to us on this question. And I remember thinking of those issues and like, yeah, we would gain some like freebies by using an engine, but we also might hit those points where we're like, we actually can't bug fix our own game because we're reliant on someone else's technical knowledge to solve things.
That makes sense. It is like a give and take situation where there's definitely benefits and then some negatives. I love that Unity and Unreal are available, and I enjoy developing in them, but I can understand when you're starting a studio, you might want that full control. So yeah, I think it's really cool and crazy that y'all decided to work on an engine basically of your own, but like hats off to you. Is that something that you ever think like maybe you would release to others, or is it like not really in that sort of state?
To release it as a tool set, we'd almost need to create like a graphic interface layer. Like we have a level editor tool that is ugly as sin, because really, I just need to know how it works to place down the map, the obstacles, the opponents,
Right.
set the objectives and everything like that. But if I were to ship it the way it looked, we have actually thought about it. And we especially thought about it like specifically of that level editor because we had thought like it would be a neat thing to give the player like a make your own little quarterstaff levels. But that came to the things like, okay, what percentage of these players really want to make their own levels? Like,
Right.
It's not going to be 100% of all the players. And then like the time it would take to make it look good and not just have someone be like, what am I supposed to do here? Like, oh, that's almost as tricky as building like a whole new piece of software. So if we make more than one game off this thing, then that becomes a different situation entirely. Like if we, if we were to develop more off of it, then we'd maybe like look at like, okay, what are these two things we created? What sort of like tools can come out of it? And we might try to do more, but yeah, that's a good question. But yeah, for now it is it works for the people who know how it works and is not documented. You haven't had to like explain it to anyone else, and so it's like super user unfriendly if you aren't on the inside.
I understand that definitely, but I have mad respect for anyone who decides to do their own engine, just because that's a big taking. So, and I do want to note that we are going to talk more about the accessibility stuff. I have a few questions later on, but I want to ask about just like from the indie side of development. How did you balance efficiency with creativity in a small team?
How do I balance efficiency and creativity? Okay, I'm not sure I have a great answer for this question because
okay.
maybe I don't feel like I have accomplished it. It's a really tough thing to do. Because I from my own experience, it has felt like going from a larger studio to something really small. It often feels like if you have a small team, a small budget, small everything, you don't actually have a lot of room for creativity. So it's going to sound weird.
But I
'Cause
feel like
it's not
your
like
game is like, it's really creative. I think you're, I would say you are efficient in that you even released your game, and a lot of developers don't even get to that point, you know? Like, that is a big deal, and, like, your game is very creative, so
Oh, okay, thank you for saying that 'cause, from the internal, perception of it, I'd like to think we had a very, free and democratic, space for other developers to be like, "Hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did this thing?" But,
yeah.
like, every time there was a "Wouldn't it be cool if this thing?" It's like, "Okay, we would need, like, a particle system for that. Who's gonna do
Oh,
that? We would need,
right.
like, a this or that." Like, because we could, it was sort of almost, like, easy to shoot down a lot of suggestions just because of, like, reality. We certainly had plenty of room for, like, creative problem solving, creativity within our own space, like, uh it, I'm glad you think the game feels creative because I
Yeah.
like to think, at least from a director point of view, like when it came to the a lot of the art stuff, I would have these like narrative based directions, like, oh, they need to look like this, this, and this. You show me what pose it looks like. You tell me what the armor should look like. And as long as it's like it needs to look like an opponent, it needs to look like a helmet because
Yeah, yeah.
we can't like make individual faces for all these different opponents. We just don't have that in the budget. So I had these
Right.
certain rules that I give people that I felt were pretty constrained. And they, of course, would come back with some really great creative problem solving within those constraints. Um, but it certainly felt like there was almost like lots of fun suggestions that was like, no, that is a great suggestion. We just can't do that. So
I mean, that happens in all
yeah,
studios, right?
yeah.
Like,
Um,
I'll say as someone who's, like, has developed, when I was looking at videos of your game, I wasn't thinking like, "It looks like they didn't have a particle system," or like, like
yeah,
it
thank you.
doesn't seem like anything's missing, like, it looks beautiful, and I'm
Thank
gonna
you.
add in clips of the videos, but I think it
Fantastic.
looks great, like, I definitely wasn't like, "That was made with a homemade engine that was" thing. So, I think you guys did really good with, like, what you had.
Gosh,
Yeah.
I think it looks beautiful too. So I appreciate you saying that. But I'm also a little bit a little bit subjective on the matter. So
Um, now, Quarterstaff features, like, a mysterious protagonist, Calrush, am I saying that right?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and a battle against a tyrant. What was the inspiration behind the game's, like, setting?
Um, it's a good question. So uh, when I quit my job, I think the people are like, oh, so are you going to do more like a dark fantasy branching dialogue? Because I think like tyranny was the thing most on their minds when they're like, oh, what's Matt going to do next? And part of me is like, gosh, now that I've worked on a game with branching dialogue, I know how difficult that is and how many people it takes and
Right.
like all the voice acting is needing. So like, I love story driven games, but on this one, we almost need to like just have a story that services the gameplay. And so like, this is gonna sound maybe not as a fun and exciting answer is, but like the number one goal of the story was just to like explain the action on screen without a festering dose of ludonarrative dissonance.
Yeah,
Because there are certain like important pillars of the game. Like it's very asymmetric. It's like you move and think faster than everyone around you. You can defend yourself against any opponent, but you don't kill them ever. And so it's all kind of pointed to a game that neither need to be about like a superhero or a wizard. And I don't hate the world enough to add more superhero garbage into our rivers and streams. So obviously, I had to go with the wizard story, and I knew that like voice acting was probably out of the question. And there was a long time where I didn't even think we'd get cutscenes. So I kind of had to just keep the story kind of simple, and I kind of just wanted to go with like kind of a classic setup, hero versus tower. It's kind of as
yeah,
classic as you can get, and then just in that space, have fun and just I don't know, play with the players' expectations because they kind of already know what the story's about. There's almost room for
right.
me to just have fun, make jokes, and yeah.
No, I love yeah. Um, let's okay. What was the process behind designing Calrush's abilities?
Okay. Yeah, good question. Okay, so there's the player has like a bunch of basic actions: stepping, dashing, flipping, charging, slashing, all those things. That was the first thing we had to build was a player verb, like set of player verbs, and it was really important to me that they could sort of all map to the 10 keypad because I'm just kind of like imagining our my idealized player is, maybe missing an arm, either because they lost it to an IED or they're holding a baby and, need to be caring for it. Whatever it is, like, imagine, like, they probably want to play this game with one hand. And okay, like, I could work with a 10 keypad, because look at it. You've got like 8 directions. The 5 key is sort of like the stand still and do nothing. Cool. If we can combine these with some context things, like really flip and dash are the same input, just different things happen if there's something in the way. I can hopefully get something where the player is inputting action without something you see commonly in strategy games is like, first you click on the action, then you click on where you want to do the action. And that sounds pretty intuitive, but if you're imagining that your player finds like every move a little bit stressful, you're trying to streamline these things as much as possible. So we wanted to kind of like imagine that the player could just be sort of like tapping into this 10 keypad moves. The final game, I think, plays better with the mouse, but this is sort of like the accessibility guideline for how the base move started. Then we add on to the spells, which we know the players are going to be using less often. So those were things where we're like, oh, they're going to first click on a spell, then click somewhere in the game space to do a thing. And that more became like a matter of restraint. There could have been a direction where you have like a bunch of different customizable magic missiles and a bunch of different area denial effects, and could have almost gone like a roguelike thing, or even like Borderlands, where there's a million different spells. But we all kind of knew that we wanted to just make like a single digit number of spells that they become familiar with. And then it just came down to like having these certain design rules, like you can't kill or dismember. So that means we have like tranquilizing brambles and ice licks instead of acid traps and fireballs. And the part of why there's some mechanics to the scoring system, and the reality that there's an undo button in the game kind of made healing something that we pulled out of the player's arsenal. There's usually healing in a lot of games, but for us, it actually made the game more interesting to pull healing out. But otherwise, we wanted to let the player, teleport, use area denial for a decoy around to mess with strategies. And as with most things in game development, I think like 2 out of our 9 spells took 50% of the work to get right. But yeah, at the end, we ended up with like 9 distinct abilities that we really liked.
I think it's great that y'all were thinking about accessibility at the very start. And I think another thing that I can share is you have this great game that it doesn't look like it. Sometimes there's apps or certain things that are made with disability in mind, and you think like this looks like an app that is made specifically for a disability. And that's not a problem at all. They are very useful. But I like this game because it is a game that anyone can play, but it also just so happened to have had disability thought in, right? It's very cool.
The Steam page is filled with positive reviews from players praising the game's mechanic and design systems. Quarterstaff blends turn-based action with strategy mechanics. What was the inspiration behind this unique hybrid approach?
Oh yeah, that's a good way to put it. So like the elevator pitch to myself and the team was probably something along the lines of like, can we make an action epic like Ninja Gaiden or Dark Souls for players that like can't do the twitch reflexes that those games usually demand of you? Like, can you drop the controller at any moment? Or another way to flip the question, can we make a strategy game where you theoretically could input turns so quickly that it would play as seamlessly as an action experience, even if we know the player might spend every turn taking their time? Could they theoretically at least play it fast enough?
Right.
And I'm not sure we precisely accomplished those with the blue. I don't know if we perfectly nailed either of those like essential design questions, but that was like the philosophy driving us forward. And we sort of began as like okay, motor control accessibility is probably the thing we can solve. Like sure, it would be neat if we could make a game for players who are totally blind, but we're not quite there yet.
Yeah.
One thing at a time. So we started thinking about actually just kind of pain points in general. And I wish I could say this in a way that isn't like throwing shade, but a lot of designs in Quarterstaff came out of things that other games did that I found to be annoying little rituals of pain, and just like, oh, this is friction. That's just part of this genre. Like,
no, that's not throwing shade. I've read that that's a good way to plan things out. Is like, what do you not like about the UI, or what do you not like about in the plan?
Yeah, like I personally feel like life is too short to be playing an RPG and then finding yourself needing to restart the game because you took a bunch of stats or abilities that you thought sounded cool, but then you realize like, actually, these are implemented really poorly and I'm not having fun. I guess I have to restart the game all over again. So in Quarterstaff, you can constantly respect yourself and change your stats at any moment. And it's very intentionally like, we don't want to close doors on you. And we didn't have any like there's no rewards that are like, oh, on the first time you get to this mission, if you do it without making a mistake, you get a special bonus. Like there's none of those, like if you didn't do it right the first time, you're somehow punished. Like I just want to take out all those things that can kind of frustrate you in other games and be like, damn it, why did I bother spending my evening playing this game? I just like moved backwards in progress. I mean, there are folks who probably like playing online space simulators where they like permanently lose stuff, but we're going for a different path here.
I love that though, because I do think that there is a space for games that where you do have to like study a manual before you start playing. But then I also think that there's just as much space for games where it's like you can adjust things. You don't have to know what everything is. And if you decide down the line you want something else, why not? Why have that friction? Why not be able to? That's just really cool.
And like part of the thinking behind the undo button is like when we first put it in, it was like how many times can the player use the undo button was one of the questions. Like how about just as many times as they want? They can just only go backwards one turn. But part of why we did that is like, if you think about it, every game has an undo button. Usually it's called like restart or reload.
Yes.
And so it's like every game has some ability to let you go backwards and fix a mistake. And my thinking is like, why add like someone bought your game, paid money for it, and wants to enjoy their free time. Like, why are you adding extra work cycles when they like fail? I figure like, hey, if they immediately know they made a mistake, let them hit undo and immediately do it differently. It doesn't, I don't need them to suffer for me to feel like the game was a success.
No, definitely. And anyone who says that like they wouldn't use an undo button, like how many times do you save before going in to fight a boss or something? Or how many times?
Yeah.
Even when there isn't an actual save button. Skyrim, I have so many saves. Even like even just small little things. I'm like, I really want to be able to go back to if I, mess something up. So
do I really want to craft this thing?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, so I think it's great that you have accepted that it's like, yeah, no, that's a thing players obviously want to have, whether they admit it or not. Yes. Let's see.
I did notice that the reviews were also really highlighting the game's genuine accessibility for a diverse range of players. We did discuss how y'all had kind of had accessibility at the forefront of every decision made. Did this cause any issues during development when planning for accessibility?
Good question. We had a lot of good resources to help us out. So there, we knew going into this that we wanted to make an accessible game, and we went to like the website is, I feel like my memory right now. I think it was accessibility game guidelines.com.
I think I know the one you're talking about.
I even gave a talk about this when I mentioned this website, and now I'm like, of course, the moment I'm forgetting it. But there was a lot of just kind of wow moments at first of like, oh yeah, here's some things we completely didn't think about. And we were really lucky to team up with the Able Gamers Foundation, and we got 10 testers to play our game, and it was really encouraging that 9 out of 10 of them made it like really far into the game. And it was good to figure out some of the pain points that we hadn't really thought about. But it was also really encouraging to find out some of the things that we had kind of pre-solved, mostly because we had some really good resources out there that were just kind of eye-opening. Like clicking and dragging, lots of games have, but it's imagine if you're using a stylus, like clicking and dragging is actually kind of really difficult. And maybe if you have click and drag mechanics, could there be an option where someone who suffers from having a hard time clicking and dragging, could they just click once, click on the destination? Because if they're using a stylus, that's easier for them. So there's really kind of minor things like that sort of we kind of didn't really think about, and then just like as we're building out the UI, like, oh yeah, just click and drag this thing. Like, oh wait, hold on, let's pull those actions out of the game. And we're kind of lucky that we like sort of had resources ahead of time that were just like letting us know that like you don't just like wear a blindfold and play a game and suddenly figure out accessibility needs. Like there's a lot more to it. And
Right.
yeah, so yeah, a lot of it was just kind of discovering pain points that we hadn't even really thought about that other players experience. So
No, it's great. And I realize it's like you're not going to be able to make something accessible really to everyone. There's just so many variables involved, but just even making the effort to take in, you know, from the beginning the large I don't know. I think it's a great like thing to do to like
Have in mind.
now on the it being playable at like in short bursts. Did planning for that affect the design at all?
That's kind of a good question. Like we knew a lot of the things that we couldn't do in the game. Like we didn't want any QuickTime events in the game. Mostly just because we didn't like when QuickTime events popped up in the games we were playing that were otherwise very patient. We also just kind of knew that we couldn't do anything that required idling. This is kind of an odd example, but if you played a lot of clicking games, sometimes they'll have like, if you're playing Cookie Clicker, a special cookie like randomly appears and then disappears. Like we wouldn't want something like that because what if that was the moment they got up and walk away?
Right.
So there's like just kind of like a lot of like things that could have been easy to implement that throw in some like, hey, this could be like a fun little thing that they could interact with. Like, yeah. But what if that was the moment they had walked away to make a sandwich or deal with a screaming kid or whatever it is?
Right.
So yeah, a lot of it was just kind of like saying no to what some things we saw other games do that like, oh, we could code that real easily. Yeah, we could, but it would be a quick way to add a thing, but let's not go that cheap and easy route because it actually would sort of like break the promise we had of like, no, really get up and go at any moment. You won't miss out on anything. I mean, I guess really the biggest example is like we just don't have any timer related things like beat this mission in 5 minutes or less. Like,
right.
Because even if somewhere in the back of our mind we thought that was fun, we would have had to have like a complex, like we would have started to have to add like a pause feature that says like, no, put the timer on hold because I am going to go, deal with a thing. But then we've broken the promise of the player of like telling them that they have to actively pause before going up and dealing with whatever it is they need to deal with. So it just sort of meant like not doing a lot of cheap and easy, flashy input things that we talked about for 5 seconds and then realized, actually, let's not do that.
There's plenty of games that do that. It's interesting.
I get the allure of you're trying to add more gameplay and like, hey, here's a really easy to implement thing that we could actually get done in a day because you're always trying to figure out like cheap and cheerful solutions to build out your gameplay. So like, I get why it's done, but you oftentimes have a game like South Park Stick of Truth, the game I worked on, suffers from this. It's like it's technically a turn-based RPG, but there's like little Paper Mario style like hit the button at the right moment when you attack to do more damage. So that even though it's like theoretically could have been a patient game, if it actually does throw a bunch of reflex games at you that you technically can fail, but you have a harder time playing the game if you're constantly failing those little mini games.
Right. Yeah.
How does the game balance patient gameplay with challenge and tension to keep players engaged?
Question. I guess we assume that by default the player is like our worst case scenario is we have a player who is very distracted. Maybe they're trying to play this game at work, and they're gonna just they're gonna maybe click a move, and they're maybe not even gonna see the game animate. They might look away. But we really, really hope that ideally players are getting into the zone and really, really playing the game. And so despite being designed to be kind of supportive of an idling game, we want the player to hopefully get lost in it. And the momentum mechanic with the part where it's like sometimes you get these extra turns that you can take where you're moving and the enemies are frozen. That I think to me magically solved a little bit of this problem of there are turns where usually you are taking moves and the enemies are kind of frozen. And then this contrasts with moves with turns where the enemies can move and suddenly the board like lights up with all these danger signs. And I think that kind of creates a natural rhythm of the player. Like at the top of the turn, you're seeing what the enemies are going to do. You're like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And then if you make the right move and you get momentum actions, now the threats are all taken away, and you get to just take a few more turns where you're allowed to be more reckless, because unless you're fighting really fast elite opponents, everyone else is frozen and you can just act with impunity. And so you get kind of these, I think, just these like casual turns, and then these like really kind of like dangerous anxiety building turns, kind of in a good rhythm. We actually very early on didn't have a thing telling you, like, hey, you're about to run out of your extra actions, because as we were testing, we were kind of taking our little momentum turns so quickly that we didn't realize, like, oh, it then rolled over into another turn where the enemy is acting, and I like, just carelessly kept moving. Part was like, it's a game it's a strategy game. So if the player is impatient, they're going to get killed, and that's the nature of the game. But
Right.
we started doing like little things like there's a slight music change when you're taking your last momentum turn, because like after this one last reckless action, the enemies are going to be able to attack again. So like you want to think a little extra about your last free action, because on the following turn, that's when enemies are going to be like paying attention to you again and charging at you. And it's kind of subtle, but before those little like extra signals were in there, when we were playing it on our own, we just kept noticing, like, yeah, I keep making my really dumb mistakes when I'm just kind of zoning out, taking my extra turns, and not realizing, like, oops, I took one extra turn too many.
So yeah, so you still want to be engaged. That makes sense. I was wondering too, like, what design choices you made to ensure the game appeals to both casual and hardcore strategy players. I think that also ties in what you were just talking about, how it's like it does pay off to stay engaged. And I think
When I was looking at the Steam page and seeing all the reviews, it seemed like they were coming from a wide variety of players. Like, some were there specifically because they were looking for a game with good accessibility features, but others were from players who were just looking for a good game, regardless of anything else. So it was interesting seeing the positive reviews from all the different categories of players. So, how did you manage to find that balance between casual and hardcore gamers and everything sort of in between?
how did you like balance that in design?
Yeah, how do we do it? Okay. So I guess completing Quarterstaff in the sense of like seeing the end of the game story. The goal was to make sure that doesn't require absolute perfection by the player. Like, you can beat the end boss without doing all the side adventures. It is of course easier if you do the little side adventures, get all the bonuses, and
Right.
then tackle the main boss. But we kind of wanted that notion of like, if you just want to see the main story, you don't have to make this game your new life obsession. But throughout each of the missions, there's 3 mastery objectives, and it's not this way with every mission, but oftentimes there's like an easy, medium, sometimes a really hard mastery objective, where it's kind of the hope that, almost kind of like Super Mario on the Nintendo 64 did it, where there's like stars in different levels, right? And
Right.
you might beat the game without getting all the stars, but then you're gonna someday like, hey, now I beat the game, maybe I should go back and get all those stars.
Yeah.
And so it's those 3rd mastery objectives that are absolutely for the hardcore player. And there's also this kind of because we let you run to the end of the game from the beginning if you want to. There's also this kind of like built-in like hardcore speed run challenge of like, do you want to just kind of go straight to the end game and see if you can do it? It's
Right.
really hard, but it's there. And kind of the hope is that, if someone beats the game, like finally solves everything, maybe they'll be inspired to be like, hey, can I do everything without all the bells and whistles that I've unlocked, and try just like
Right.
a run straight to the end game. So yeah.
That actually tied into my next question. In my notes, I have that it says in a lot of the reviews that there's a lot of replayability in the game. Are there additional challenges, difficulty modes? How was that achieved?
Yeah. Well, actually, there's no difficulty mode in the game, which was a intentional decision.
Okay.
We had thought about that, actually, and kind of the goal was to make like, there's just one difficulty mode, but seeing all the game, like 90% of the game takes this much skill, 95 takes this,
Right.
and that mostly was just a to be honest, a scheduling decision on my part, because I knew I had to like balance the levels, make sure the mastery objectives were kind of the right mix of challenging but achievable. If I then had to balance each level with multiple difficulty settings, I was kind of setting myself up for disaster.
It sounds like you did that without having to actually put in settings, right? Like it's like
that's certainly what I told myself. Like, I don't need to know all the settings. I'll just make each mission have a built-in easy, medium, hard level of completion.
right.
And I guess I'm almost kind of inspired by GoldenEye. Again, on the Nintendo 64, you can probably tell how old I am here. They had special things unlocked by like there's usually like the agent, double O agent, secret agent, like levels of unlocks on each level. And I really liked that approach because if you just wanted to see the end of the game, you didn't have to like master every single level. But if you did want to master each level, they have these progressive rewards for it. And I think that's a really good structure where you just, you take the same play space and you just, ratchet up the demands on the player. And it really works for our game because most of them you can accomplish the first time you get there. It may not seem like you can. And we actually kind of like hope that like if you're stumped, you go somewhere else in the game, get new stats, new spells, new something. You come back and like, oh, this is totally easy now. And that's their hope at least. Our hope at least. But we don't have any other difficulty settings. And I theoretically would someday love to add a new game plus. Like if we're super duper successful and tons of players start beating the game and asking for more, it's probably not that hard to add a difficulty setting that I haven't like calibrated really well, knowing that only like players who have beaten the game are really demanding it.
Right.
But that new game plus thing felt kind of not something like we needed in the game, especially when you're trying to ship a game. I wanted to work on the new game regular before I work on anything new game. So yeah.
No, that makes sense. I mean, it sounds like you were like, I'm not kidding. I have it noted that it was like I saw a couple that were like replay. There's a lot of replay. So like it sounds like you did accomplish that without actually having to put in strict mode, that sort of thing. So I think that that's great. Oh, we actually covered all the questions.
Cool.
So I guess I just want to say that like it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I'm going to include links to the Steam page and all of your like socials. I really recommend players go check it out. The game is out. It just came out in October, right?
Right.
I think you guys are doing great work. This is going to be one where I want to edit in a lot of like gameplay footage and stuff because I think it's a spectacular looking game. I think y'all did great.
Thank you.
So
Thank you so
yeah.
much.